There's nothing wrong with being a little unique.
Well, hi there! Welcome to Yarn Over It, the channel devoted to yarn reviews for crochet, knit, weaving, and all kinds of fiber crafts. I'm Sarah, and today we're reviewing Uneek worsted self-striping yarn. I discovered this yarn at Knit New Haven in New Haven, Connecticut about 2 years ago. The very first thing I noticed was the color, or should I say colors. This is a magical self-striping yarn unlike any other. When worked up, it creates an illusion of striping with two different color lots of complementary colors. That results in a wholly unique project, something that you would normally have to get by buying several different color lots, perhaps even of several different fiber companies. There are some drawbacks to this design, but we'll talk about that later in the episode. Before we dive into the deep end, remember to like this video and subscribe to my channel. If you love getting new yarn reviews on your homepage, remember to tap that little bell so you never miss a new episode. Also remember, Yarn Over It is unaffiliated with the products reviewed. I'm just doing this because I love yarn and I love my fellow fiber enthusiasts. We're a community, so kindness and respect are the rules of engagement. Uneek worsted is out of one of those little boutique fiber companies. It's created by Urth Yarns, spelled U-R-T-H, in Turkey. One of the nicest things about this fiber company is their devotion to creating low, or at least lower impact fibers. For every hank you purchase, they plant a tree in Africa. I'm not sure why Africa. You'll have to check out their website. But they're also devoted to employing women while making hand-spun, hand-dyed small batch yarns. I can get behind all of that. Besides that, their Instagram is gorgeous. Go out and find them. It's so much fun to scroll. So far, so good, right? But the big question is Uneek worsted the right yarn for your project and skill level? To answer the questions, we'll evaluate the yarn based on the following categories: price, craftsmanship, care, workability, and touchability. This last one is kind of arbitrary, and it's based on whether or not I actually enjoy the way the yarn feels in the hand. You work with yarn, you get it. For price, I give Uneek worsted a rating of half a heart. A hank of Uneek worsted retails at $26 per hank. Now they are generous hanks at 220 yards, it's 200 meters, with a recommended gauge of 6 stitches per inch for a 4 to 5 millimeter needle. I think that's a US 6 to 8. For an extra fine merino superwash yarn, that's still on the high end of average, as you can find other fiber mills selling extra fine merino at slightly cheaper prices. Do keep in mind that those normally have about half the yardage that a single hank of Uneek worsted has. For craftsmanship, I give Uneek worsted my whole heart. This is where they make up for that steep pricing. I have never found a knot in a hank. Never. Even though the dye lots are small batch, I find them remarkably consistent. In other words, if you buy color 4116 1 month, then go back a year later to find that same colorway, it won't result in wildly different colors. The yarn also wears remarkably well. I have never had any pilling or color loss, and garments created with the yarn hold up to rough treatment, and I can say this definitively. I made this scarf a couple years ago, and in that time I've dragged it around the world, even using it as a blanket on a transatlantic flight. Then when I landed, I wadded it up and stuffed it into my carry-on. Look at it. It's still gorgeous. In other words, this is one well-crafted yarn. For care, I give Uneek worsted 3/4 of a heart. It is a superwash yarn, which means it isn't prone to felting, but that doesn't mean you can accidentally toss it into the washing machine with your jeans and expect it to come out happy. I do recommend hand washing and laying flat to dry. It's a springy yarn, so if you hang it for any part of the drying process, you're going to get a ton of stretch and misshaping in your project. It's fairly color fast, but I have found some dye lots are less set than others, and I've tossed out a few tubs of muddy water when the dye runs at washing, so do keep that in mind. For workability, I give Uneek worsted half a heart. Let's get these hanks into a workable form, and you'll start to understand why it gets that rating. Alright, we have all of our hanks turned into cakes and ready for some swatching. If you've never swatched, I can't recommend it enough. Yes, it's a tedious pain in the butt, but it communicates a lot more to you about sizing and the amount of yarn you need than the recommendations on the tags. It's why we get this huge range. I mean, really. Uneek Worsted recommends a US needle 6 to 8, which is 4 to 5 millimeters for the majority of the world. That's a big difference in gauge. And I'll tell you, for me, it really depends upon the project. I've gone as small as 3.5 millimeters, which is a US size 5, and up to 5 millimeters on the scarf that I showed you before. But the intention there was to get something a bit lacy and airy. If I was making a sweater, which I really don't know that I would use this yarn for a sweater, but if I were, you would end up having to wear an undershirt or something under that sweater because it would be really loose unless you are an insanely tight knitter. Alright, let's make a swatch. You can already see, just from winding, that the plies are starting to separate here, and that's where we talk about skill level. It's not that you can't use this yarn if you're a beginner, but I think your frustration level would be a little bit too high because those 6 plies are already unwinding on me and all I've done is cast on. I've decided to go with a 4 millimeter needle and a US size 6. That's after a little bit of experimenting, but that was what I needed to use in order to get that 6 stitches per inch gauge. Now I'm going to knit up a 4-inch swatch, 4x4 square. The reason most yarns and most patterns recommend that is if you only knit up 1 inch, what are the chances that you're actually going to be able to wash that and block that and get anything that shows you a substantial picture of how the yarn's going to work overall? Because remember, we're not just knitting the swatch, we're going to wash it and we're going to block it and see, do we gain a little bit of ease or do we lose some ease? In other words, does it grow or does it shrink after it's been blocked? We're going to fast forward through some of this, but mostly I want you to see, as I work the yarn, notice how those loops change and how that yarn unravels as I work. That's not going to matter as much here in the body of the work. We're just doing stockinette, and I've got super sharp knitting needles. These are Chiagus, interchangeable needles. And they've got a really pointy point on them, as you can see. But, see that unraveling? Unless orphans and widows don't bother you, but those little stragglers really bother me in a finished product. And if you're hooking, you can't help yourself. You're going to be splitting your yarn as you're pulling up your loops, especially if you're doing anything more complicated than a single stitch crochet.
All right, let's see how far we've gotten here. This is our 4-inch mark right here. We're going to do another 2 rows and then we're going to bind off. It's probably going to be a little bit over. I feel like I'm getting, if you count, in stockinette, I'm getting, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I'm getting about 7.5 rows and about 6 stitches, which is exactly on gauge. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That sixth one is kind of going over. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, but it's about on. All right, 2 more rows. So what I've got to say, and you're not really getting a feel for the color change here. I will show you a finished product or finished project with a different skein of yarn that I'm going to turn into a hat. But I don't mind it at this gauge. It is really tight, but at the same time what I'm finding is some of the loft of the yarn, it diminishes greatly as it's being worked with. Some yarns don't do that, and this one really compresses. So even though I started out saying, I don't think I'd want to go 4mm, now that I've actually done up a swatch on it, I think I'm sold.
There's no doubt the results that you get with this yarn are pretty beautiful. I mean, the striping, the texture. I really love the twist. It makes it perfect for hats. As a matter of fact, anything where you might need a seam, like a sweater, even though I said for myself personally I might not make a sweater with this, but around the arms, around the neck, the brim of a hat, mittens, gloves, the twist in this yarn makes it really, really stretchy. Here's the problem. If you're a beginner or you aren't confident with the pattern or the stitch you're using, the yarn has a tendency to split. That's putting it mildly. As a matter of fact, if you unravel at all, underestimate the length of the tail for your cast on, or completely change your mind about the pattern you want to make, Uneek will untwist with very little provocation. For that reason, I don't recommend it for beginners. And any yarn you can't hand to your favorite 10-year-old to teach them how to start making stuff drops points in my opinion. Now, if you're a crocheter and you're making lace and you're just wanting to zone out and really just grab loops all day long, you're going to have so many widows and orphans, you're going to feel like you've survived a war.
But, you see this? It just keeps wanting to split. So you're not going to get a beautiful bind off because you're going to get all these weird little ends. Look at that. That's annoying. Monkey balls. So that's annoying. You always need a little bit of attention to get, see, and there it is again. That extra.
And that brings us to the last category. For touchability, I give it a whole heart.
All right, here we are, post-blocking. And you can see it just gets softer. It's an incredibly soft yarn. It doesn't have any of that itch. You know, if you go in, whenever I go into a store, I'll take a hank of yarn that looks so beautiful and put it up under my chin, just in that delicate little spot on the top of your neck, and see, does it make me want to crawl out of my skin, or does it feel cozy? This is one of those yarns that feels very cozy, close to the skin. It gets all of this beautiful stretch, and it blocks beautifully. It unravels. The twist will just fall right out on you, but that is how it blocks. and it maintains its structure. So when we
Overall, Uneek worsted gets 3/4 of a heart. And that's a pretty good rating when it comes right down to it. Some last thoughts specific to this yarn, because I know you're going to want to go get some. I mean, really, I can't believe you're still watching the video. Why aren't you in the store? Why aren't you online? Have you already bought some while you were watching it? Show me what you make. As a matter of fact, I'm always surprised when I walk into a yarn store and they don't carry Uneek worsted. Seriously, it's a delight for the eyes. And because there's an element of surprise, even stockinette or single crochet can hold your attention. In fact, I'd say this yarn does best with simple stitches, since what you really want to show off is that striping pattern. There are definitely patterns which work better for this yarn. The scarf, for example, actually does the yarn a disservice in some ways. It comes across as just another rainbow striped yarn. Working it in that long horizontal to get my vertical stripes meant the complementary colors got swallowed up and lost. Plus, since there's all that yardage, you'll also find most hat patterns leave too much yarn behind to get a really satisfying show of the color play. Here are two hats by comparison. A fairly straightforward beanie and this ridiculously large beret that I made specifically to see if I could get a single hat out of a single hank. You'll see I still have yarn left over. And in the case of the beanie, there's almost enough for another little cap. No pom-pom on the top of this hat is going to eat up all this yarn. I'd recommend a scarf or shawl pattern with relatively few decorative stitches, where you buy at least 2 to 3 hanks, so you really get to see that color play flow in and out and reveal itself to its optimum degree. You want to use enough yardage that those stripes have a chance to shine through.
So there you go, Uneek yarn, one of my favorite yarns to come out this year. Self-striping, all kinds of fantastic. Makes you feel free to be just a little bit ridiculous, right? And at the end of the day, with the kind of year we've all had, a little ridiculous is exactly what we need. Don't you think?